Welcome to She Sells Radio. So I have a question for you today. Have you ever had one of those dreaded moments on a client sales call where you get an objection and you realize you are completely fumbling your way through it? The only reason I would know anything about that is pretty much what my whole early sales career was built on. And I know, if you've been following me, you know, kind of my background in sales and some of the accomplishments I've had. And you also maybe don't know all the things I screwed up early on and continue to still kind of fumble my way through in certain moments for sure. And I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, and they are definitely part of the process. But I also know that I have lost deals and lost opportunities that I could have probably, of course, not only made the money on, but also really help people if I had better tools in my toolkit. And so that's why I'm so excited to bring you two amazing guests today who believe that you should practice with your peers, not on your prospects. So Jonathan and Jordana are the co-founders of the Practice Lab, a place where sellers come together to develop their selling skills in the same way that performers, athletes, and musicians develop theirs. Jonathan and Jordana, I'm so excited to have you on the show today. Welcome to She Sells Radio.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm
thanks
so
for
glad to
having
be
us
here.
on.
It's always fun too when I have co-founders, because it's like we get to hear different angles and different aspects and all of that. So this will be really good. So, okay. I think let's just talk origin story here briefly. Like, I want to hear from both of you a little bit of your background, what got the two of you together, and what created the inspiration for the Practice Lab.
Yes, I'll start with that. So the Practice Lab really started maybe about 18 months ago. I actually started a new sales role at a company, and I was going through their onboarding. And really, there was three things that kind of happened at the same time, which birthed this project. So the onboarding videos that I would watch in the morning were really good videos, right? Like really good training. They taught us about the right behaviors, talked to us about how to handle objections, what discovery questions to ask, how to talk about pricing and competitors. It was good stuff. I'd have lunch, I'd go take a walk. I'd use like the Gong app to listen to recorded calls as I walked. And I would listen to the calls of my actual peers, that were going on a day-to-day basis. And there was almost no overlap between what we were all being taught and what people were actually doing on real sales calls. And it was this really strong reminder to me that there's a really big gap between like intellectually understanding something and knowing what good looks like and knowing what you should be doing, and actually having the skill set necessary to pull it off in a real conversation. And I recognize that same gap in myself, right? I'm a pretty avid reader and listener of podcasts, and I know all sorts of sales theory, but when I watch my real calls, they do leave a lot to be desired, right? A lot of that theory doesn't show up in my execution.
Yeah.
So that was during the day. And the third thing is that in the evening, I was reading a book called Peak, and later a book called The Talent Code, which is very similar. Both these books are by researchers who have spent decades studying top performers in a variety of industries, from acting to music to sports to chess, you name it, and studying what it takes to become the very best of the best, right? How do you get to the top 1% of whatever your field is? And of course, in those books, they talked about the gap between knowing and doing, between understanding and execution. And in every other discipline, the way that gap is closed is through a particular type of focused, deliberate practice. So I realized for myself that I really needed this. If I was going to become the seller I wanted to be, I needed to practice my selling skills, not just, hop into a sales call and do my best and then repeat the next day. So the very earliest seed of the Practice Lab is I was actually working, I reached out to some colleagues of mine who were also onboarding. I was like, hey guys, do you want to come practice with me once a week? And we started doing that, and that felt really good. So at that point, I reached out to Jordana because she had a bit of a background in sales and practice, and she was a sales trainer, and kind of asked her if she wanted to offer this kind of to our LinkedIn networks. And one thing led to another, and what became kind of a hobby suddenly became a side hustle. And what was a side hustle suddenly became a business.
Yeah, as it goes. I love it. I love it. It's so needed. And I can relate to a lot of what you shared. So Jordana, from I know you're a sales trainer, that's your background. Like, what's your journey been like getting here?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So I'm one of those people that tripped and fell into sales and never ever imagined I would be in sales in my entire life. I started out in the art world and was in theater and running an arts nonprofit. Fell into sales when an art tech company needed some people who could speak the language of the art world. So I came in, and what's so interesting is that for the first year on the sales team, I just did not feel it. Like I felt a little bit embarrassed about being in sales. I wasn't really bringing myself to my selling conversations. Our team was very split off. Like we would take all of our sales conversations in like these startup-y style phone booths. So no one ever had the opportunity to really hear like what other people sounded like. We didn't hear victories. We didn't hear failures. We didn't hear awkward attempts. And the entire position really just felt like it wasn't quite a match for me and what I was wanting. And I was thinking about leaving sales until this incredible, incredible head of sales came in. And the very first thing that he did literally was take us out of our phone booths and into the sales pit so we could start to hear each other. And he would offer feedback and coaching on the fly in public so that we got to hear what he was listening for and how he was coaching everybody to improve. And we practiced together. We role played. We started to support each other in a way as a team that we just hadn't in the year prior. And through the practice, through the camaraderie, through the feedback, developed a culture of feedback on the team where all of the feedback wasn't just coming from the sales leader, it was coming from each other. And we started to soar. We started to feel like we belonged in our selling. We started to become more skillful. There was a level of psychological safety on the team that was established by way of all of our hearing our messy attempts and failures and wins. And it was contagious. And it was then and there that I decided or kind of realized that I got as much, if not more, gratification from coaching and developing my teammates as I did my own sales wins. And when I left and moved on from that position to become a sales coach, I found myself at a practice-based sales training company that took a similar approach, not the same one that we take in the practice lab. And it was like, once I saw the impact that breaking down the sales conversation into bite-sized chunks had, and once I became a coach that facilitated practice rather than just conversation or explanation, it was like I couldn't unsee how much improvement there was, both in terms of skill and also confidence. So when Jonathan reached out to me, it's like we both had this understanding that practice was what was needed and came together to offer this to sellers all over the place.
Now you said something, Jordana, there that I want to go back to. You said in that role, like before the great director of sales came in, you weren't really, and I think what you said is you weren't really bringing all of yourself to the sales calls.
No.
In so many words. What does that mean? Like, I want you to go a little deeper in what that was like for you.
I think we all had this idea, especially because we were selling to galleries who are a little elite and a little snooty, like that we had to almost like be some kind of character version of ourselves, like speak the language of the gallery, adopt the tone, adopt the way of being. And I'm just not that way. And most of us on the team weren't that way, but we had such I don't know if it was a fear or issues around status about what it meant to call into these big galleries that we thought we had to leave ourselves at the door. And what was so interesting is that this head of sales had no experience in the art world at all. So he didn't have the same kind of reverence or fear that we had of these prospects. And he just insisted that we drop the mask and be the same person that we were 5 minutes when we were joking around with a teammate, as we were on the phone with our prospect. And that permission, that humor, that lightness, that allowance to show up as we were, be it quirky or a little stumbly or imperfect, was like the unlock, at least for me, for really feeling like alive in the work, I guess. Because when you spend 8 hours a day feeling like you have to be someone else in order to perform, that affects everything. How well you perform in your selling conversations, how you feel in your life.
Totally. And that's always, Jonathan, I want to ask you this question first, then we'll pop it over to Jordana. But, to me, that's always been a bit of like the rub with scripts. And I came from a background of very heavily scripted sales conversations where it was like, you can't deviate. Like you literally don't deviate from the script. And I remember one of my more painful moments that really hurt me in my heart was I was talking to a great guy, great prospect. He'd seen me speak somewhere, and we were on a sales conversation about him signing up for coaching. And the script that the company was very adamant that we use, it always felt a little off to me, but they were so adamant that we use it. I was like, okay, I'm going to just follow the playbook. I'm going to say what's being said. And as I'm like going through the price build up, he pauses me and he's like, could you just stop reading from a script and talk to me like I'm a real person?
Wow.
And I remember in that moment, I was like, oh, okay, it's not feeling good to me. I don't feel like I can be myself. It's clearly not feeling good to him either. So, what is that? I want to hear from both of you. Like, obviously, you're helping people hone their skills, you're helping them develop their, like, the right words to say. But what is that sweet spot, in your opinion, between being scripted and then having, like, being able to bring ourselves to that? How do you help people find that? Jonathan, I'll turn it to you first.
Yeah, there's two things flowing through my mind, right? One is that I would say the degree to which you pre-plan out what you're going to say and script it, right? And there's, varying degrees of a pure script versus more of a loose talk track, versus just a framework. But the extent to which you plan it out, I think, has a lot to do with how predictable that moment of the conversation is. For example, if you're opening your first call, right? It's like an introduction call. You probably have 10 of those a week, or maybe more, maybe less, depending on your business. And they tend to go the same way each time. That's one you pretty much can, if not script it out word for word, at least, lay out the framework of what bullet points you're going to hit. And it's always going to be the same. So you can prepare for that with kind of traditional rehearsal type practicing. Some things that are a little bit less predictable, best examples like a discovery call, right? Or some, out of left field objection you haven't heard before is another unpredictable one. You can't really practice for those by, preparing in advance what you're going to say, right? So kind of this transition, the second thing that runs through my mind is that practice does not necessarily mean rehearsal, right? Practice does not necessarily mean a script. It certainly can, but think about other disciplines where they still practice, but there's no script. Let's say you're a martial artist about to go into a competition. It's not scripted what you or your opponent are going to do, but they still practice, right? If you're a freestyle rapper, nothing scripted that you're going to say, but you can still practice, right? If you're an improv comedian, nothing scripted, but you can still practice. So practice doesn't necessarily mean you're an actor holding a book of lines, reciting them, right? There are ways to practice where you're just fundamentally working on your neurological skills, your linguistic skills. You're just improving the piece of hardware that is your brain, so that when you land in those unpredictable situations, you'll be able to handle them better because of all the practice that went in advance. So there is a time and a place for, rehearsal, so to speak, for scripts. But again, there's a lot more to practice than just that.
That's a really good point. It's a higher level context to what's going on here. And because obviously you all work with people in different companies. So it's like they have their own talking points, they have their own scripts they're bringing in, right? But it goes beyond that as well. So Jordana, yeah, what would you add to that?
I was just also going to say too, Elise, like this idea about giving yourself permission to bring yourself into your selling. Oftentimes for some reason, people think that sales skills are like different than human skills. Like things that work in selling only work in selling. So there are these sales hacks or these tips or these tactics, right? But what Jonathan and I have found is that the things that are most effective in selling and the things that we teach in the practice lab are only effective because they're human skills that are regularly employed and can certainly be regularly developed in all aspects of our lives. So, all too often, sellers will think about discovery as like this checklist of predetermined questions that have to be asked, rather than thinking like, what does it feel like to be actively listening in a conversation and then to feel curious about something, like just literally curious, and then to allow that curiosity to fuel a question that I can ask that digs at some of the more interesting, deeper things that we all know motivate human beings. Maybe it's around impact or about the emotional tenor of a decision or a purchase, or what's really, how whatever is going on in an organization that you're selling to might be causing other problems, let's say. But in absence of understanding and giving yourself the permission and discovery to be in a conversation with a human being, asking questions fueled by curiosity, it can be kind of hard to effectively do discovery because you feel locked, right, into a checklist or a framework. So I think it's important, as we talk about bringing ourselves into our selling, and we even talk about sales skills as first and foremost, recognizing their effectiveness because they're fundamentally good human skills. And then that in the process of practicing and developing skills that allow us to be a better and more effective salesperson, we're also practicing and developing skills that allow us to be better human beings as well.
So appreciate that you share that, because that to me is some of the gifts that I see in our community that oftentimes through conditioning, whether it's you had a like just really not great sales manager who was like, just stick to the script and don't like, to me, I'm a big believer in using intuition in the sales process. And I understand it. That's hard to manage. It's hard to teach when you're teaching a large group of sales professionals. But to me, like Jordana, what you just said, following the curiosity, asking the question. And we have a very diverse audience that listens to our podcast. A lot of our audience identifies as being a woman. And so it's like, when I think about the skill sets that a lot of times women naturally bring to sales, it's listening, it's empathy, right? It's some of those more human skill sets that sometimes they don't get celebrated, or they almost get like stomped out in teaching the process. So what are some of those other human skills that you see translating to sales as sales skills that we may not even think about as sales skills? I'll turn it over to either of you who wants to jump in and answer that.
Go for it, Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, like, three that jump out right away that, we have labs built to train people on and to help people practice on, is listening. And how you listen, right, is a huge one. It's not just a matter of like more and less listening. Like there's different styles of listening, which have different effects on your partner. So listening is one. Curiosity is a huge one. But not just part of it is just like the sense of curiosity at all. But then also part of it is you can kind of train your curiosity to become curious about the right things, right? To become curious about things that really matter. You can train your curiosity to do that. So when someone's sharing something with you and they say something, the questions that pop into your mind are questions about deeper level impact, are questions about, how this problem is affecting them and their business and their lives. And you can have more productive conversations because, again, you've trained your curiosity to get curious about more interesting, impactful stuff. Empathy is certainly one, right? There's a lot that goes on in empathy, from just like the physical observation of signs and cues, but also just kind of the internal processing and your mirror neurons knowing what to do with those signals when they come in. So those are big ones. There's something else, I don't know how well I would describe it, something I've stumbled on recently, is there's a certain, mental emotional gymnastics you have to do in sales, where you get very attached to the outcome of working with someone, but not in the traditional way salespeople get attached to an outcome, which is, I need the sale to hit quota, I want the sale to make money. It's being attached to the outcome for the other person's sake. It's having the mental ability to say, you know what, yes, there's, incentives in it for me, but I'm going to temporarily just set those aside, not focus on them. I'm going to focus all of my energy on the other person and their situation, and why this arrangement, right, this partnership would be really good for them. And I'm going to let myself get like locked into and almost, develop affection for that idea, right? And like fall in love with the idea of working with them and having a partnership and helping them with their problems, and really get connected to it for their reasons, and then convey that passion that you have for this shared vision, or this vision of working together, convey it to them. And again, to do that, to put yourself in the mind frame where you're temporarily setting aside your own incentives and you're instead choosing to really get mentally and emotionally bought into this vision that benefits them. I don't know what the word for that is. There probably is no word for that, but like I found that is hugely powerful in sales when you can get to that point, right? Because all too often what we see are, generally speaking, it's sellers who are all caught up in the outcome for their reasons, right? Occasionally we see sellers who are just detached from the outcome and just don't care, like whatever, buy it or don't. But that doesn't help inspire people to take action, right? So that sweet spot is definitely allowing yourself to get captivated and caught up by the idea of how beautiful it would be to work with this person. But again, maintaining those boundaries so that you're only focusing on it for their reasons, not yours. So that may have been a really long tangent, but that's something that I've stumbled into recently, which again, you can see the parallels between other aspects of life, right? Anyone in your life that you're trying to help, anyone in your life that you're trying to motivate them to make a change in their life, whether it's your children or your siblings or, friends, that's a very human skill, right? To be able to fall in love with a vision and convey that passion to someone else, but to do it for their reasons rather than your own reasons, that's really powerful. And we just happen to be in a profession in sales where that same skill set is needed to succeed. But again, you can take that skill set elsewhere and, motivate your kids to do their homework, or motivate your friend to, exercise more, or start a business. I mean, who knows what, right? You can use that motivational skill anywhere.
I'm gonna try that on our toddler tonight and see what happens when it's time to dinner. Fall in love with the vision of your dinner. But I love that though. And I think too, it takes the pressure off of you, right? As the seller, because when we make it about ourselves, that's when we feel the pressure. So Jordana, anything you would add to that in terms of human skills?
I mean, another really interesting human skill that comes up in a surprising place for us is gratitude. And we insert it at the moment of objection, which might
Oh,
seem kind of crazy and
okay. Talk
counterintuitive.
about it.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, so you get an objection from a from a prospect. And of course, in your mind, the first instinct is like, shit, or can I swear in this podcast? Right? Like, this isn't what I wanted. This is going to derail my sale. This is where the relationship ends. This is where everything that I've been counting on gets lost, right? But we teach that there's a slightly different mindset that you can take centered in gratitude, which before you think about your own outcomes is first an appreciation and an acknowledgement that they told you what was on their mind at all. Because we often forget, like in these sales conversations, maybe our sales manager or maybe we ourselves as solopreneurs think like we have to figure out what our prospects' pain or challenges are. But we're a perfect stranger and they don't owe us that, right? So even the fact that they're opening up about their pains and challenges at all in the context of a sales conversation to see if we can help them, we, someone who is financially invested in being the solution for their problems, right? Not the safest thing, there can be some gratitude there. But when a prospect voices an objection, if we express gratitude that they said what was on their mind, what was authentically going on for them, rather than say nodding, smiling, and ghosting us, that allows us to shift our mindset a little bit around both the mutual respect that's shown in the relationship and the timbre of our response. So in the objection handling framework that we teach, what we really focus on is everything that you do before you suggest the perspective that you hope will change their mind, that is really designed to lower their resistance, increase their receptivity and feelings of safety. So at the very least, they're open to hearing what you have to say when that moment comes. So it's that beat of gratitude internally. Just, I'm so glad they share this with me because now at least we can have a conversation about something. Then the next step is actively thanking them. We call it welcome, really glad you shared what's on your mind. I so appreciate your transparency, whatever that looks like. And then the next step, rather than attempting to overcome or asking like a gotcha question, right, to back them into a corner, is literally to ask some questions in service of true, deeper, authentic understanding. Because if we understand more about why our prospects are objecting, not only do we gather more information that we could then use to more effectively and in a tailored way, eventually attempt to shift their perspective if that's what's needed, but in the process of making it our focus to understand them, they in turn feel understood rather than overcome, which in itself does wonders for how open, receptive, and safe someone will feel.
Yeah, I love that. I've never enjoyed the term overcoming objections, right? It just feels very forceful
Yeah.
in its approach. So I'd love if we could play that out a little bit here. So you said when someone shares that, expressing gratitude, and then truly from a place of curiosity going deeper.
Yeah.
Let's say that somebody's listening and let's just say she's a coach and she gets a money objection from a client. Like, I'd love to do this, I'd love to do this program. I just don't know how I'm going to pay for it. I don't know where the money is going to come from. Can you give an example of how you would go deeper and how you would approach that?
Yeah. Yeah, Jonathan, you're great at coming up with these on the fly. I'm going to pass it over to you.
Sure. Yeah. So the three steps, right, are to welcome, empathize, then ask questions, understand. So it might start off with, hey, thanks for being real with me about that, Elise. I get it, right? Times are tough, so thank you for being transparent. And I get it, right? The economy is slowing down. You guys have a lot of expenses you got to pay attention to. So I imagine it would be tough to allocate a significant sum like this. I'm curious, when you're thinking about how to allocate limited funds to make it through, and kind of thrive next year, how are you thinking about that? And what are some of the priorities and things that you're weighing?
Oh, you want me to play it out with you? Should we go deeper?
That was probably good enough. Probably good enough. And that, may not be the most beautiful, succinct question I ever asked, but, first I welcomed it. I kind of empathized with their thinking and what they were going through in that moment. And then again, I asked a question to kind of keep the conversation going, because that's ultimately the goal of this, right? Is to lower defenses, increase receptivity, but most importantly, keep the conversation going. Because if you handle it in that way, an objection can be the beginning of the most powerful, fruitful, productive conversation you've had with that prospect. right? Rather than being the end of the conversation where the relationship dies.
Yeah.
But it's usually just getting past that initial hurdle, right? To the point where they do keep talking and the conversation does keep going on. So those 3 beats of welcome, empathize, and understand are what allows the conversation to keep going. And sometimes you keep going down the conversation, you keep talking, and you find that, yeah, in fact, it doesn't make sense to work together. But at least now you as a seller have the satisfaction of knowing that, yes, in fact, it didn't make sense. I didn't just lose this from poor salesmanship. It truly is circumstances that are making us part ways. But in some cases, you find that, their perspective can be shifted, or what they're concerned about, there is a way around it. And then you do find a way to work together. But again, you'd never know that if the conversation ended with, sorry, I don't have the money. So this is a 3-step process for, again, opening them up and keeping people talking, which, again, to Jordana's point, starts with gratitude. You can try to do this from like a fearful, grabby mindset, but it's going to be really, really hard. So taking just 1 second of silence to center in that feeling of gratitude of like, wow, it's tough to be the bearer of bad news, and they chose to do that tough thing. And because of that, we're having to have this conversation. I'm so glad I have a chance to have this conversation with them. Like, just centering on those feelings can totally shift the rest of the conversation.
It takes guts to share an objection. It's vulnerable to share an objection. If you have a friend in your life who comes to you and has the guts to tell you that something you shared with them hurt or upset them, let's say, if you just say, yeah, well, the last time you said this, that upset me, that's instantly going to cause them to close up. But if you instead say, I'm so glad you're sharing this with me. I can so understand why when I said that thing, it really hurt your feelings. It's a completely different dynamic. And that's why, again, it works with kids, it works with friends. That is why human to human, that approach is effective in sales as well.
Good. And the piece that I'm thinking about here too is like one of the things we teach so much in the community is just about the importance of your emotional state. And we're not going to go into quantum physics and the feeling state and all of that too far like today, but it is so important. This is something that Joe Dispenza teaches, is you can't think greater than your emotional state. So if you go into a fear state or you go into a scarcity state, you're not going to have, like, in that moment when they give you that objection, you're not going to be able to lead that powerfully and help them get to where they need to be. But if you can take a moment to center in that feeling of gratitude, your thoughts will be more elevated. You'll be able to think greater solutions for them, greater questions to ask, and stay in that state that's in alignment with the ultimate goal you're both going for. So I've never heard it taught that way before. I think that's super compelling and interesting.
Actually, interesting. You mentioned that, like you can't think and therefore can't act at a level higher than your emotional state. We found that's very true of cold calling, where you can talk to people all day long about, here's a great talk track to use, or you can talk to them about the importance of confidence or about the importance of slowing down. You can tell people their pitches, their tone, right, is very important. But ultimately, if you're in a frazzled, panicked, fearful state, there's really no one out there who can like just willfully force all of their verbal and nonverbal cues, right, that they're sending out through their communication to align the way they want. It's not quite a waste of your time, because you can make some progress, but you're not going to get very far if you ignore your internal state and just focus on, these are the words, this is the tone, this is the speed. I'm just going to practice and ignore the internal state. So we actually have like specific labs or exercises designed to help people with cold calling. And we spend half our practice time practicing the internal state, practicing the mindset, the emotions, having people use tools that are familiar to other disciplines where mindset's important, and we're applying them to the world of sales. So it's mantras, it's visualizations, it's recalling like emotional memories to first get your emotions in tune. And then you jump into your practice round and you try out your words and you practice your tone, but like it starts with getting the emotions dialed in. And that's been really cool for us. It's new for us, right? We had always kind of skipped the emotion piece and just focus on behaviors. So now this last lab, or this last cohort, is the first time we've done that. And it has been really powerful. And people have consistently, rated that part as the most impactful part of the experience, was focusing on their internal state.
Oh, I'm so glad you all are doing that. I love this. What are, let's do like maybe 1 or 2 things that you teach people to do to enter into that emotional state before they go into their cold calls or their discovery. Jordana, I'll turn it to you to share.
Yeah, sure. So we teach kind of 3 ways in. One is a mantra, right? Like, affirming with words the state that you want to be in order to pull off, let's say, the vibe or the tone you want to convey on the call. So it might just be like, I am so confident right now, right? Or like, I have never felt more excited to go into this cold calling block. And when you say these words, and science shows this, right? Like, you can shift your state, right? It can become your reality. So that's one. Another one is visualizing a successful outcome. Imagining that your prospect is really excited to hear from you, like, oh my God, I was just thinking about you guys. So glad you called, right? Or you could imagine entering your prospect's name into your CRM and like booking a meeting and passing it off to your account executive if you're on a sales team. And then another really, really powerful way to emotionally prime yourself, and actors use this all the time, is to look back and remember a time when you felt blank. And it could be a sales time where you had the most incredible cold call or the most incredible discovery call, and you vibed so hard with your prospect and everything worked out. But it can also be totally outside of a sales context, like a time your friend made you feel really good, or that time in high school when you were on a soccer team and scored that goal and it just felt incredible. Like, all of those tools allow you to begin to shift your emotional state, because only 7% of communication, so they say, is in words, right? And this is true on phone calls too. So when you're calling somebody out of the blue, there's a lot happening in your tonality, and it can be very hard to force your tonality if, as Jonathan said, there's fear, nervousness, terror, dread going on inside.
And people will feel it too. They'll feel it. So
you feel it. You can't fake it. You can't fake it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, not at all. Okay, this is so good. I want to ask one final kind of topic question, and we'll tell people how they can connect with you further and get involved with your work. But I want to talk about overcoming the fear of making mistakes, because this is a conversation I've been having with my clients a lot lately, like specifically around money. I've had a lot of people kind of getting past that battle of fear of making mistakes around money and investing, and kind of like helping people get into more of an abundance mindset there. But I want to talk about fear of making mistakes with a prospect, right? And how often does that probably hold us back, have us not show up to our best selves? So what's a mindset switch that you help clients achieve when it comes to overcoming that fear? I'll turn it over to whoever wants to jump in and answer first.
So I'll just share that one way, that's kind of the hypothesis of part of why we exist, to make fewer mistakes on the phone with prospects, is of course to practice. However, I actually think, as sellers selling to other human beings, that we have a lot more leeway than we think on sales calls. And that if we ask a discovery question that like feels a little awkward in our body or lands a little poorly, we can say, you know what? I don't think that question sounded very good. Do you mind if we like rewind the tape and I ask a question that really gets to the heart of what I want to know about, right? Mm. Or even using things. Our friend and a colleague in the space, Charles Melbauer, often talks about the humbling disclaimer, which is a little phrase that you can insert in advance of, say, asking a difficult question, which in some ways is very humanizing and allows your prospect more often than not to give you a pass. And it sounds something like, at the risk of asking a really salesy question, I'm curious, like back of the envelope, like how much revenue do you imagine this is costing you, right? It's that at the risk of asking you a salesy question, or I don't even know how to phrase this as a question, but I'm finding myself really curious about like how the morale on the rest of your team is going with all of these layoffs. I don't know how to phrase this. Or this might sound like a foolish question, but. So if you're uncomfortable, you can actually name your discomfort. And that other human being on the other end of the line is more often than not wanting to kind of jump in and rescue you and make it okay.
It's very disarming, like in a great way.
Yeah.
I would imagine, I'm just thinking about being on the other side of that, you would feel a certain level of humanity and connection with that person, because we've all been there, and they're making it more real. So yeah, awesome tips. Jonathan, anything you would add to that?
This kind of strays off the path of sales and practice and all that. And it's just something that I've found is powerful for myself as I kind of start off in my entrepreneurial journey here. Of course, we are also, afraid of making mistakes, so to speak. It's a concept that I first learned in a book by Nassim Taleb called Anti-Fragile. And the way he explains it is that fragile things are damaged by stressors. right? Imagine a wine glass breaking. Robust things are generally unaffected by stressors. Imagine a brick, right? Drop it, it's not going to break. Anti-fragile things grow stronger because of stressors, right? Human bones are a great example of that, right? Athletes have some of the densest bones out there because of all the stress their bones are under. So he encourages whenever something happens, typically something unpleasant, unplanned, or undesirable happens, ask yourself, like, what's a fragile response to this where I'm really harmed? What's a robust response where I can get by just fine? But then ask yourself, what's the anti-fragile response to this? How can I use this to be better off because of it happening? And I've been adopting that thinking ever since we started this project. And literally every time we make a mistake, one of the steps we take is we ask ourselves, okay, that just happened. Is there any way we can be better off because it happened? And sometimes we find great answers and we are way better off because a mistake happened. Sometimes it doesn't go so great, but we at least recover from it. But like that mindset of every time a bad thing happens or mistake happens, asking yourself, how can I benefit from this? Once you've done that a few times and once you've seen some success with that and you've actually turned a few mistakes into wins, you suddenly aren't nearly as afraid to make mistakes anymore, because you're like, all right, I'll do my due diligence to try to make sure this isn't a mistake. But at the end of the day, I know that if it does end up being a mistake, I'll find a way to turn it into a good thing. And that just gives you so much confidence, right? As you move forward through life and through your business, knowing that you can have that anti-fragile response to just about any mistake that you make.
That's such a good perspective shift. I love how sales translates to life in every single way.
That's why it's so interesting. I feel like that's why we're here. Like if we were just talking about selling a widget for cash, like would the three of us be having this conversation here? You know, it's so much bigger than sales.
Knowing the three of us, we might get into it.
Maybe.
But you're exactly right. Yeah, it's so much bigger. It's so much bigger. So Jonathan, Jordana, tell everyone, where can they go to connect with you to find out more about the Practice Lab, how they can get involved? And I want to also ask, is this something that if you're an entrepreneur, maybe you're doing founder-led sales, can you still benefit by getting involved? What does that look like? Like, who do you serve and how can someone get involved?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I'll say that Jonathan and I are very active on LinkedIn. We're talking regularly about practice and so many of these ideas. So you could follow us there. You can learn more about the program at thepracticelab.co. We also, on the third Wednesday of every month, host a free objection handling training called Wheel of Objections, where you have a chance to learn about and then try on for size the very framework that we talked about. In the conversation with you, in collaboration with practice partners from across the B2B landscape. And then, thirdly, yes, founders and solopreneurs are very much sellers, and all of us can benefit from growing more awareness around the fundamental human behaviors that have the biggest impact on our conversations and our relationships with our prospects. So we would welcome anyone who's listening, who's curious and wants to apply to future cohorts to reach out and do so.
Amazing. This was such a fun conversation. And I just want to say, I appreciate both of you and the work you're doing. I think, I love that. I feel like the people I'm connecting with right now through the podcast and through social, it's like there's a common mission to kind of raise the level of consciousness in the world of sales and business. And you both are very much doing that through the Practice Lab. So thank you for what you've created and for coming on today and sharing so generously. It's been really, really enlightening and also just so fun to get to know, you, Jordana, to see you again, Jonathan, and to have this conversation. So thank you both.
Thanks so much, Elise.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So to you, my listener, we will link everything in the show notes to go get connected with Jonathan and Jordana. Connect with them on social, on LinkedIn. You can check out the Practice Lab. We'll link that as well. I love the Wheel of Objections. So that sounds like an amazing thing to join on the third Wednesday of the month. And get connected, get the support that you need to help really, really hone your skills and help serve more people through your sales process. So as always, thank you so much for being a listener of the podcast. You can always go get connected with me and what we're doing over at elisearcher.com. Find out more about our programs for women to help scale to 6 and then 7 figures and beyond. So grateful to have you in the community. We'll see you on our next episode of She Sells Radio. Bye for now.